Hey everyone, Tyler here. Thanks for dropping by. This video is all about timecode. Now, by the end of this video, my goal is for you to have a basic understanding of timecode and how to utilize it and how to think about timecode from pre-production and we'll kind of walk all the way to utilizing timecode in post-production, which is where you really see the power of utilizing timecode. So what is timecode? Well, it's essentially an internal clock on cameras and field recorders and all that stuff. But what makes timecode so special is it doesn't stop at the second hand. There actually are two numbers at the very end, which are synced to your frame rate of your camera. And this is how it's possible to utilize timecode to sync up multiple different cameras and everything and field recorders to instantaneously sync them up in post-production because they can all use that same timecode. Now the trick is getting that exact same timecode on every single device, whether it's your camera, your field recorder, maybe a lavalier pack that you have, but whatever the recording device is, it's really important and necessary to make sure that that frame rate is synced up exactly. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now, there are a couple of ways of going about this. Some cameras actually have like a built-in timecode out to send timecode externally, like the Sony FX6 has timecode out, so you could walk that over to like a FX3 with the proper cabling and stuff and jam the FX3 timecode. That's not super recommended because most cameras don't have really accurate timecode clocks and they have a frame drift, which can drift a frame or two or whatever over a couple hour span of time. Now, another way to get timecode is to use something like a field recorder, and you can send a timecode signal out of that field recorder and send it into the camera through appropriate adapters and all that stuff. And that's fine if you're just using a recorder and one camera and you're just recording audio separately and just want to send that same timecode signal inside of the recorder to the camera, keep that plugged in, then that timecode technically should stay the same and you can sync it up no problem. But when you start introducing more cameras and devices into the mix, then you kind of have to revert back to what they call jamming the timecode, which basically like plugging the adapter into the camera to kind of set the timecode or reset the timecode from whatever it was and jamming it that way and then unplugging it and then moving over to a different camera and doing the same thing. So in essence, you're just jamming the timecode in. There's no timecode signal constantly being fed into the device. But the most recommended method and the best practice is to use a dedicated timecode box. So I've got one right here. This is the Deity TC1, and then this is the Tentacle Sync. Both of these, what they do, they have one job and one job only, and they do a very, very good job of that. And that is to generate a timecode signal and send it out and send it into whatever device it's going into, a camera, field recorder, yada, yada, yada. What makes these so special is they have very, very accurate timecode generators inside. The clock is super accurate. I think the Tentacle unit has like one frame drift every 24 hours, and I think the Deity unit has a one frame drift every 72 hours or something. So hopefully you are not having like interviews or something for that long. If so, that's intense. Most of the time though, you're working a 8 or 10 hour day, maybe a 12-hour day if it's going really long. And so in that time period, you're not going to have any frame drift issues if these are plugged in all the time. And that's the most recommended practice, is to just get a dedicated timecode box for each camera or audio recorder or all that and just keep these plugged in. Like for example, my audio field bag, I'll have a video linked to that somewhere. And basically what I have is just one of these set inside of there all the time to run a timecode signal into the mix pre at all times. And then I have more of these timecode boxes to attach to different cameras and stuff and just leave them on the cameras all the time so that that timecode signal is always being fed into the cameras. Now I also have a slate that Deity makes, the TC SL1, which is a slate, which is great. You can write metadata on it and stuff, which is really helpful even if you're using timecode, because you can write like, you know, if you're doing interviews, you can write the talent's name or whatever for the editor. But anyways, that thing's super helpful because it also has a timecode generator, the same timecode generator built in to as the TC1. And it's really good because then you get a visual frame of reference of the timecode as well. anything you can do to help with syncing things up in post is super helpful. And if you are sending this stuff off to an editor, if you get everything synced up with Timecode, they're going to be much happier with you than if you don't have any Timecode at all. All right, so earlier I mentioned kind of giving you a basic knowledge of Timecode and how it relates from pre-production all the way through post-production. So let's just like start at pre-production and then go to post-production, and then we'll talk about some scenarios where you may not find it necessary to use Timecode and where I really find the power and usefulness of Timecode. So starting with pre-production, say you're on a client call and you are, working through the project, and that's where you kind of determine like, hey, I think this project, this frame rate will be best suited for this project. Okay, great. That's kind of that's not the whole pre-production process, but from a Timecode perspective, identifying your frame rate is super important. So in the pre-production process, you determined your frame rate, and this is something that you could communicate with your sound mixer if they're going to be in charge of Timecode, which is pretty common. Or if you're working with an in-house team, you have your frame rates identified so that when you go to set up your cameras, hopefully like the night before, the day before, you're getting your cameras all prepped up, you're setting your frame rates, your picture profiles. What you also want to do is just one extra little step is just to go into your Timecode devices, power them all on, make sure they're all charged, obviously, and go in and just make sure that your frame rate is set exactly the same as your cameras and also any other devices that will be recording. And the great thing is like when you set the frame rate to this and you power them off, it's going to remember what that frame rate was set at when you power it on the next day for the shoot. But what I like to do is build out the cameras and get Timecode and everything all ready to go so that on production day, all we need to do is power everything on and do a quick sync of Timecode, and then these boxes will be ready to go the entire day. So onto production day, the cameras are already built. Hopefully settings are already set up. And remember, I didn't mention this just a second ago, but remember to still have some sort of scratch audio in camera as well. That way it just gives you another frame of reference if the Timecode from the box and the camera, I've seen sometimes the box and the camera might have a frame difference of 1 or 2 frames consistently. So it's just nice to have the sound so you can nudge it in post-production, which we'll get to here in a second. But on production day, camera's already built and everything, and all the settings are all set up. So all you have to do now is once all the Timecode devices are powered on, and for me, like I use the Deity Theos lavalier packs as well. And what I do is I make sure those are powered on as well, because those are obviously transmitting audio as well, but I just make sure those are on at the same time. So when I go into the Sidus Audio app, all the devices are listed there, and you can just click sync. And I like to hit the little clock icon to sync it to time of day. That way, for future reference, you can have time of day, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But also, if you are flying to a different time zone or something, and these were set from a different time zone, using your phone will just update to the current time zone, and it just makes things a little bit smoother in post-production and just from an organizational standpoint and all that good stuff. And so once you hit sync, you are off to the races. This process is pretty much the same with the Tentacle units. There's an app that you open on your phone, and you just click sync and have it all ready to go. And that's pretty much it from the production day. The battery life on these are really good. It'll last an entire production day. So typically what I do is I power them on in the morning, and then I will sync it up in the morning. And since these have 1 frame drift every 72 hours, you can just leave these running in the background the whole day and not power them off, and just kind of let them keep on running. Even if cameras power down for battery swaps or whatever, as soon as the power of the camera goes back on, as long as these are still connected, then the camera will recognize that a Timecode signal is coming in, and it'll update the Timecode automatically. And since these are all synced together, then the Timecode is going to still remain accurate. Now, moving on to post-production, and let's pretend the shoot was, an interview with 3 cameras and an audio recorder. We'll just keep it really simple for right now. So when you go into post-production, you've downloaded the footage and everything, and you're importing the footage. That Timecode is going to be baked into the metadata of the video file or the audio file. And so it's really easy to sync them all up. If you're creating a multicam clip, you just highlight all your clips, right click, and then you create a multicam clip or multicam sequence, whatever your editing program calls it. And then you just sync your files based on timecode. Now, there is one caveat to this with regards to syncing your timecode, and that is if you are using a mirrorless camera that doesn't natively support a timecode in signal. When you're using one of these devices, what you're doing is you're going to send the 3.5 millimeter out into the 3.5 millimeter mic jack input on the mirrorless camera. And what it's going to do is it's going to send this nasty sounding digital signal sound that sounds like this. And it's going to send it into channel 1, typically on your camera. And that audio file is going to have the timecode embedded in it. And then the second channel is going to be a scratch channel. And so what you need to do if you're in DaVinci Resolve or Avid, I'm not sure on Final Cut and Premiere at this point, but I know for a fact in DaVinci Resolve, you can highlight all of those clips, say from the R5, for example, right click, and then you'll find a little section that says update timecode based on audio track. And once you click that, it's instantaneous, and you only have to do that once. You don't have to do that every single time you go to make a new multicam clip, but you'll see that timecode, that start timecode number change from whatever it was before to the accurate timecode that was sent from the timecode box, which should match all of the other cameras. And then you can just treat those files just like any other camera that had timecode in it natively. Now, if your editing program doesn't support this, then Deity and Tentacle Sync have a desktop app to basically do that process for you, to extrapolate that timecode signal from the audio and kind of bake it into the metadata. So there is an option. If you buy the Tentacle Sync units, then you get a free license. I think you put your serial number in of the Sync E. And then I think the Deity program is free of charge, but I haven't really looked into it because I've never really had the need to use that program. But those are definitely options for you if you're in a program that doesn't support that feature from DaVinci Resolve. I mentioned earlier, like some cameras for some reason have like a frame difference between what the timecode box says and what the camera shows. I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind that, but this is why it's useful to still have audio and even using a slate. And so you can just like nudge it 1 frame or 2 frames to the left or the right, depending on what the situation is. And like, it doesn't happen with every camera, but I noticed it with like one of my old Blackmagic Pocket cameras. For some reason, it did that. I have no idea why, but recording audio in gave me another little reference point to make sure that the audio was synced up exactly. But that still it takes way less time doing it that way than auto aligning based on waveform, because typically in my experience, if you auto align based on the waveform from the audio, it usually isn't synced up exactly anyway, so you have to nudge it. But syncing up with timecode is so much faster. It's instantaneous as opposed to syncing up with a waveform. Now, there are certain circumstances where like using timecode isn't really all that necessary. And if you're doing like content creation like this, or if you're filming an interview with just one camera and you're running audio directly into the camera, like right now I'm running this microphone directly into the XLR input on the FX3 on the top handle. And I see no need to use timecode for this, because like that would just add more to the workflow. And like, I don't care about time of day or anything for this file. I just recording audio straight into the camera. Not a big deal. But where I would use timecode, even if I'm running audio directly into like the FX3, for example, is if I'm filming an interview. And the reason being is because of the ability to have the time of day. And I mentioned this earlier, but what I'll do is I have a little notepad, and you know, if I hear a soundbite that I'm like, that I definitely want to have that in the edit, I'll just write what time of day it was. Like if they said something at 11:32, I'll look down at my watch and write down 11:32 and just kind of keep track of it that way. And when I bring it into my editor, I use DaVinci Resolve. I'll do data burn in, click data burn in, and put the timecode overlaid. And then I'll just kind of scrub until I hit 11:32 and that gives me kind of a frame of reference of that's where that part is where they said something really good that I want to have in. So it's really handy just for that. And even more so if you're filming multiple interviews, it's really handy to have that, because if you film 7 interviews during the day, having that little note-taking process has actually become like really efficient for me, because that way I don't have to necessarily remember every single thing that everybody said during the interviews. I kind of have that little timestamp, like on not on the palm of my hand, but you get it. But also, like, if you're running multiple cameras, that's where Timecode is really nice, because it just saves so much time when you are trying to sync up all the clips. So hopefully that was helpful. Of course, I'm not going to go over every single camera on how to get Timecode set up, because that would just take way too long. Just look up your camera and you look up your manual, or even like Deity's YouTube channel has a lot of great quick tutorials on different cameras and stuff to get those set up with Timecode, and it walks you through how to set up the Timecode box as well as the camera to get Timecode fed into that camera, which is super useful. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments and I'll answer them to the best of my knowledge. But if I don't know the answer, then I won't know the answer. So anyways, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.